unpredictability of Metroidvania-like games never fails to astound me. With how often titles of this genre release in admittedly smaller scale projects, you'd think they would get tiring at some point. However, Lost Ruins demonstrates that there is much uniqueness yet to be instilled within this genre, even if there are a fair amount of stumbles along the way. Lost Ruins has players control an amnesiac protagonist simply named Heroine, who has awoken in a rather brooding underground. Soon after awakening, she encounters a girl introducing herself as Beatrice, the guardian of the castle they currently reside in. The heroine ultimately chooses to steel herself and face the dangers ahead to find answers regarding her puzzling predicament. Then after some more preambles, you end up exploring the castle while encountering a plethora of dangerous monsters and some other not so friendly faces. The story and characterizations of Lost Ruins are certainly serviceable, as each of the characters have their fair share of entertaining banter. Still, unfortunately, none of those factors left a particularly persistent impact. The ambiance is quite gloomy due to how the game attempts to instill the sense of survival horror. The environments are dingy, and the sense of the unknown is stark and in your face. The gameplay enhances this mood, with enemies dealing colossal amounts of damage, your surroundings dishing out treacherous traps, and low health being a constant. This state of disconcertment the title establishes is effective, though regrettably, it all haphazardly falls apart the further you progress. There is easily found equipment that is a little broken to the point where they trivialize many of the game's challenges. For instance, there's a swimsuit armor that you can obtain that nullifies lightning damage, and combining that with electric spells utterly demolishes your water foes. I ended up annihilating a boss with little thoughts thanks to this method. This also served to negatively impact the character's exchanges I briefly mentioned earlier, as the dialogue of the boss you encounter seemed to affix to the harrowing tone the game initially presents itself with, creating this sometimes humorous disconnect between gameplay and story. Speaking of gameplay, Lost Ruins consists of action combat with RPG elements. There are weapons with their own identifiable swing speeds and other equipment with their own slew of altering benefits. There is certainly a variety of loot to find, though not very much of it is worthwhile. It tends to be either identical or inferior copies of what you already have found, making the act of obtaining new gear a gradually mindless chore. It also doesn't help that the currency is rather arduous to obtain, making the shop an almost questionable inclusion at points. I rarely found myself ever making use of the money since I scarcely had enough of it to make any meaningful purchases. Combat itself is also quite a mixed bag. In addition to the existence of easily obtained broken synergies I mentioned prior, the act of actually fighting is frequently unfun. When performing in combat, it becomes immediately apparent that the heroine is deliberately designed to be sluggish with her swings. This is not an inherent flaw, but it becomes one when the enemies seem to go against this movement philosophy. They are swift if fought against naturally, often seeming as if they are meant for a different type of game entirely. Personally, I found the design of the heroine to encourage learning avoidance and spacing the enemies of similar speeds to strike back. This problematic design issue is even more pronounced when dealing with groups of enemies, as the only truly safe ways to deal with them are spamming spells and other tools. Fighting enemies one-on-one is not nearly as deficient in execution, as you can usually identify some windows of attacks if you dodge, jump, etc. Still, their drawing rapidity in groups compared to your own movement made combat an unfun and unfair affair. The message I got from the enemy design was to stay a cautious distance from afar and spam whatever long-range tools I could, since going close quarters was practically never as safe. I have no doubt it's possible to prevail with melee, but once again, the inherent risk of going toe-to-toe with enemies that are directly opposite in speed to me was far too great. I also have some other critiques, such as the game being a tad too linear, MP being a chore to restore, and others. I did manage to derive some enjoyment from Lost Ruins though. The art style is gorgeous and impressive with its pixel goodness, and I presume the beauty of this art direction will be what many players walk away feeling content with. And just to add, the girls were increasingly attractively drawn. For as much as a mess as progression was, I still enjoyed myself whenever finding a not so hidden room and grew mildly amused by the dialogue. Lost Ruin, at its core, just feels like a jumbled heap of ideas with a lack of fortified execution. The disheartening loss of the initial defining, disconcerting atmosphere rids the game of its sense of identity. The combat didn't feel adequately thought out when considering how broken some tools were, combined with how much more laborious close quarters combat is compared to ranged. Lost Ruins manages to stand out from others in the genre and establishes itself as a unique experience. The masterclass of pixel artwork alongside the conceptually engaging gameplay ideas more than shows that much effort and care went into this adventure. Still, implementation is everything, and sadly, Lost Ruins doesn't seem to have a clear idea of what it wants to be, opting instead to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Noisy Pixel is giving Lost Ruins a 6.5 out of 10. Thank you for watching. Please read the full review at noisypixel.net. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers who work hard to deliver news, reviews, previews, and more. Please subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.